Welcome back to the Creative Endeavoring podcast. So, in the last episode, we talked about autopilot, how your brain runs patterns automatically, and how you can move through your day reacting without even realizing it. But today, we are going one layer deeper because autopilot is what you do, and your default state is essentially where you're doing it from. And before we jump in, if any of these concepts I've been talking about, triggered you or feel confusing in any way, I get it because naturally your response can be that your thoughts didn't choose your upbringing or diagnosis, or all the setbacks in your life. And you're right, we don't consciously choose a lot of what happens to us in life, but what we do have is the ability to become aware of our choices and how we respond. And bringing awareness to that response and understanding why can give you a better feel of what your baseline state is. Like what you do when you're faced with difficulty. Do you let it consume you, or do you move into problem solving? Do you replay the same situations over and over again, feeding the same thoughts and emotions, feeling, more restricted each time? Or can you take a step back and observe what's happening so you can redirect your energy and move towards expansion? I know when something feels out of control, the last thing that we want to hear is that we are responsible for how we respond. It's definitely triggering. But what I noticed over time in my life and then later working with others is that the biggest obstacles that people face aren't always the external ones, they're the internal ones. And it really is all about your state of mind and understanding that most of what you think, feel, and do throughout the day isn't actually coming from conscious decision. It's coming from the patterns that are already running automatically in the background. And that autopilot that we talked about in the last episode is the expression of your default state. That baseline state becomes the lens you experience your life through. So when you wake up in the morning, for, some people, there's a brief moment where your system is quiet before everything comes online. But for most people, they wake up right into their default state instantly. And that default state is built from everything that you've experienced, everything that you've repeated. It's your patterns, your emotional tendencies, your expectations, and your identity. It's what your system has learned over time, which means before anything even happens, your system is already anticipating and already filtering and assigning meaning. You don't react or respond randomly, you respond from that baseline. And there's a system in the brain that's responsible for this, and it's called the default mode network, which was identified by neuroscientists actually not too long ago, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, as a system in the brain that becomes active when you're not focused on a specific task, like when your mind is wandering or daydreaming, or when you're replaying conversations, thinking about yourself, imagining the future, worrying, comparing, or, mentally narrating your life. That constant internal dialogue that most of us have is the default mode network running. And one of its main roles is maintaining a consistent sense of self over time. So if your internal narrative sounds like, I'm behind in life, or I'm not good enough, no one loves me, I'm always lonely, the DMN will continue pulling up evidence to support that story. That's its job. Continuity, it is not personal. It keeps the story of who you believe you are consistent. And that voice in your head can come from a parent, or a teacher, or even a friend, someone who maybe told you one day to be realistic or ever questioned you or made you doubt yourself. things you've heard growing up. And when those moments were mentally repeated or emotionally charged, your subconscious stored them as familiar patterns that feel true. And that's your default mode network. Okay, so now underneath this narrative system is another layer that makes up your default state, and it's your subconscious mind. But before we go deeper into that, I want us to get a better understanding of how our minds are structured. So I want you to imagine that your mind is a house with different floors, and we're going to start with the top floor being your conscious mind. And this is where you do all of your thinking and your decision making. Okay, like choosing what you're going to wear or what you're going to eat. It's the part of your mind that you're aware of in real time, in the present moment. It's what you're using to listen to me right now. Okay. And then the middle floor is your subconscious mind. And it's less like a thinking brain and it's more like a pattern storage system or a filing cabinet. Okay. It holds memories that have been emotionally charged. It holds your habits, your conditioned responses, all your beliefs and experiences formed through repetition, any assumptions about your identity. I mean, everything that you've experienced or been taught gets stored there. And over time, it becomes your baseline. And it's what makes things automatic. You don't consciously decide how to react every time something happens. Your system runs what it already knows. It influences your breathing, your posture, your tone of voice, your reactions, all without you consciously thinking about it. It doesn't sit there, analyzing or questioning things. It just stores and executes. And I really like how Florence Scovel explained it. Okay, she described the subconscious as power without direction, just like steam or electricity, that it doesn't decide what to do, it just does what it's directed to do. It has no power of induction, which is why something like driving a car becomes automatic. At first, when you're learning to drive, your conscious mind is doing all the work, right? Thinking through every single step. But then over time, through repetition, it gets stored in the subconscious, and now you just do it. So that's the subconscious mind. Now, the bottom floor is your unconscious mind or the superconscious, which is on a much deeper level. And we'll keep this simple because it's something that we're going to be exploring later in this series. But this deeper layer is less about patterns and more about potential. Okay, it's where intuition comes from. But if your subconscious patterns are loud and your nervous system is dysregulated and your mind is constantly looping, you can't really access that layer clearly. So instead of trying to jump straight into higher states, this work starts by understanding what's already running, okay? Because once you cut the noise and the patterns start to shift, that deeper intelligence, which is the superconscious mind, does become more accessible. So when you put all of this together, your subconscious mind stores the pattern. The default mode network narrates that pattern in real time, and your conscious mind experiences the result. And together, that's what creates your default state, the lens that you're looking through. Think about two people walking into the exact same room, okay? One immediately feels welcomed, and the other immediately feels judged. Nothing in the room changed. The room is exactly the same. What changed was the lens each person brought with them. That's what default state does. It influences what you notice and what you focus on and what meaning you assign to an experience before you're even consciously aware of it. Your brain is essentially a prediction machine, right? All day, every day, it is anticipating what's most likely to happen next. And it does that based on your default state, because the brain isn't designed to wait for life to happen, and then figure it out. It's constantly trying to prepare you for what's coming. It's taking everything that you've experienced in the past and using it to make its best guess about the future. So your system is constantly asking what's most likely to happen next. And then it doesn't just wait, it starts filtering your perception, your thoughts, and your reactions through that expectation. And those predictions don't just shape your thoughts, they shape your state. So if you've ever walked into a conversation expecting conflict, right, you've probably noticed how quickly your body tenses before anything even happens. Or maybe you walk into an opportunity expecting it to go well, and suddenly you feel more relaxed and open and confident. So the event hasn't even happened yet, but your prediction happened first. Remember, your nervous system is constantly scanning for that one core question. Am I safe, or do I need to protect myself? It doesn't just respond to, what's happening around you. It also responds to what your brain believes is happening or is about to happen. So if your prediction model expects rejection, stress, or pressure, your nervous system can begin preparing for that experience before it even arrives. Your body tightens, your breathing changes, you start overthinking and become hyper aware. You react more quickly, and it's not because something bad has happened, but because your system is preparing for what it believes is most likely to happen. And on the other hand, if your system predicts safety, openness or possibility, your body shifts into a more regulated, expansive state, right? Your breathing deepens, your muscles relax, your perception opens, and your thoughts become clearer. And from that state, your responses become more intentional. And this is why two people can go through the same exact situation and have completely different experiences, because they're both interpreting the event differently and responding from their own unique prediction model. One person might interpret something as rejection, and another might see that moment as neutral or even as an opportunity. Same event, different baseline that then equals a different outcome. We are each responding from our own default state. So let me give you a simple example so you can actually see how this plays out in real life, okay? So let's say you send someone a message and they don't respond. That's the trigger. Now, in that moment, your brain doesn't just wait. It immediately starts predicting based on your past experiences, your stored patterns, your emotional memory. So your system might go, they're ignoring me, or I said something wrong, or they don't like me. That's your prediction model activating. Now your default mode network starts narrating that story, pulling in past moments that feel similar, reinforcing that identity. And then your nervous system responds. So if that prediction feels like rejection, your body shifts into protection, right? You might feel tension, anxiety. Now you are overthinking. Maybe you check your phone constantly or start replaying the conversation, or maybe you withdraw completely. And now your behavior matches the state. And that entire loop reinforces the original prediction. So the next time something happens that's similar, your system gets there faster. Okay? So now let's take the same exact situation from a more regulated perspective. Okay? You send a message, there's no response, same trigger. But your internal model is different. So instead of assuming rejection, your system predicts something neutral or open. Like they're probably busy. I'll hear back later from them. It's no big deal. So now your default mode network supports that narrative, pulling in evidence again where things worked out. And now your nervous system stays regulated. There's no urgency or tension. There's no need to react, just neutrality. So your behavior reflects that state. You move on with your day and you stay present. You don't over attach meaning to the moment. Same situation, different prediction, different state, completely different experience. And that's how your default state is constantly shaping your reality. It's not just through what happens, but through what your system expects to happen and how your body responds to that expectation. So now let's take that same situation from the default state of the first example, having been reactive, but now we are in the process of awareness and interrupting the loop. Okay, we are creating change. You send a message and there's no response, same trigger. Your system starts to do what it always does, right? That thought comes up. Did I say something wrong? That's the beginning of the prediction, okay? But this time, instead of immediately following it and allowing it to continue and ruminate, you notice it. You catch it in real time. You see and observe the thoughts without automatically believing it. And in that moment, there's the shift. Your default mode network might still try to pull up the old story, and your prediction model might still lean towards what's familiar. But now what you've done is create space. And because there's space, your nervous system doesn't escalate the same way. Okay, there's less urgency, less reaction. And from that place, you can choose a different response. Maybe you don't check your phone, or maybe you don't spiral or, overthink it. You just let it be. You interrupt the thought and tell yourself a different story. Same trigger, same initial thought, but a completely different outcome. And that moment when you're able to see the thought without automatically becoming it, that's the shift. That's the difference between being inside the pattern and observing it. So when we talk about creating your life, you're not just creating from what you're doing. You're creating from where you're doing it from. And that is your default state, driven by your prediction models and regulated by your nervous system. And this is why change can feel so hard, because most people try to change their actions without changing the state that those actions are coming from. So it can feel forced or inconsistent because underneath it, the same prediction model is running, the same expectations, the same emotional patterns, the same internal narrative. So if you can learn to observe your patterns, then you're no longer completely inside of them. You have space. And in that space, there's choice, the ability to pause, to notice, to not immediately follow the same thought, the same reaction, the same emotional loop. And that's where the change begins. Not by forcing a new behavior or trying to fix yourself, but by becoming aware of what's already running in the background. Because you can't shift what you're not aware of. And most people are trying to change their lives without noticing the patterns that are actually creating them. But once you do notice them, you can start to interrupt them and you can start to question them. You can start to choose something different. And over time, that's how you begin to rewire what feels automatic. That's how the subconscious starts to change and how the default state begins to actually shift. It's definitely not an overnight fix, but through awareness, repetition, and new experiences, your system updates. And that's what we're going to start exploring next. The difference between the part of you that thinks and the part of you that can observe those thoughts. Because learning how to shift into that observing position, what I call the perceiver, not the thinker, is one of the most powerful things you can do when it comes to changing your internal patterns. But for now, just start noticing, start paying attention to the stories that your mind tells you. Notice what, feels automatic and what narratives keep repeating themselves without judgment, just awareness, because awareness is what gives you access to change. Okay, so take what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, and I'll see you at the next episode.